So this is the Tamron 35-150 f2 to 2.8 Di3, I think, VXD. Never know what those mean. And it's going back to the shop tomorrow. Shout out to Wex Photo Video here in the UK, who have an excellent returns policy. Hashtag not sponsored. And it's going back for a few reasons, one of which is exceptionally petty, but it's very frustrating because I've been interested in this lens since it was announced for the Nikon Z system, and it would solve so many problems for me because I mostly shoot wildlife on the Nikon Z9, but it's a good camera, so I want to use it for other things. But the Nikon lens range is quite odd below their telephoto range. Their telephoto lenses are fantastic. They've clearly been focusing on that aspect of their market, and they have a lot of options. They have a lot of options at the wider end too, but they're nearly all flawed in weird ways. And so this lens should be a winner for me, and I've looked at a lot of reviews. I've been really sort of thinking about it for a long time. It's an expensive lens. It's about £1,800, which is a very large amount of money to spend on a zoom lens, but 35-150 covers everything that I need from a lens. I don't need wider than 35. I never need wider than 35. I'm not a wide angle lens person except for video. So 35-150 would be an amazing landscape lens and a great portrait lens and a great walkabout lens, even though it's very heavy. It's 1.1 kilos, I think. But the weight side of it didn't even really factor in to my decision because this is a Nikon Z9 and it's already a big heavy camera. So sticking a small lens on it's not going to make it a portable camera. It's still a pro body camera and it's heavy. So why not just stick one hefty lens that does basically everything on it and be done with it? So that was the theory. And in many ways, it sort of fulfills that. It's a nice lens to shoot. The weight isn't too bad. And I like most of the feel of it even. But there are 3 flaws to this lens, and none of them seem to have been mentioned in the reviews that I have seen. So here's a quick run through. Number 1 is it vignettes like crazy. It took me a while. In fact, I only just realized, and I've re-recorded this video since, because I didn't realize that the Z9 had vignetting control in it, because I would have left it on by default anyway to correct for modern mirrorless lenses, all of which tend to vignette quite a lot, and they're corrected in software. It just lets them be a bit more flexible with lens design. Even if you set the vignetting control in this to high, not normal, but high, it can't fully correct the vignetting of this lens wide open. It's not as bad stop down, but it's something to note because, you know, for portraiture, that's good. I like vignetting for portraiture. It makes the focus be more on the subject. It's a really interesting sort of technique that I quite like shooting that way. But for landscapes, I don't want it at all. It's exceptionally frustrating, and on bright skies and things like that, it does crop up, and you do get vignetting. Like if you turn the vignetting control off entirely, you get it pretty much all the way through the zoom range and at basically every aperture. It's basically fine from f8 with the sort of normal setting on the vignetting control. But it's not the end of the world. A lot of lenses do this, and I could put up with that. But secondly, it's got what I can only describe as a broken manual focus system. All these modern mirrorless lenses are focused by wire, so the control ring for the focus here at the front of the lens is not connected to anything except some circuitry. It's not connected to the focus elements. Fine. That works totally fine on the other Nikon Z lenses I've got. And here, for example, is an 85 1.8s. The manual focus on this is perfectly fine. And you can see the difference. For this demo, I'll use the 40 f2, which is the cheapest lens, or joint cheapest lens on the Nikon Z lineup. And Look at this clip of me manually focusing this lens. And notice how with the focus peaking on, it's perfectly smooth. It manually focuses fine. And now compare that to the Tamron. Both of these are set to non-linear focus, which is preferable usually for photography. It lets you do quick focus changes. But linear is more useful for video. That's what people tend to set. This makes no difference. It's the same with both settings on the Tamron. There's something wrong with its manual focus setting. It isn't smooth. It doesn't transition gradually through the focus range. It goes in jumps. Now, I would suspect that this is a firmware problem, but it could potentially be tied to the focus motors, but that seems weird to me. So I do think it's a firmware problem. Hopefully they can fix this because it's not good enough. I mean, I'm probably never going to use this for manually focusing. The Z9's focus is excellent. I very rarely manually focus on anything except wildlife, which can be problematic to pick up sometimes with the autofocus. But it's a problem. It shouldn't exist on a lens this expensive and that has been out for 5 months. Someone should have noticed this. Someone should have fixed this by this point. But I could forgive even that because I'm probably not going to use that. What I can't get past on this lens is something that's quite petty. And it is this stupid function button. This is on the bottom of the lens. This is not uncommon. This is the Nikon 180 to 600, and here we go. Got the same function button on the bottom. But the difference here is that when I'm using the 180 to 600, I use the lens foot to rest my hand on it. And so it rests in my palm like this. And you'll notice how this part of my hand is not pressing that function button. And we'll come back to this in a minute. Different people hold lenses in different ways. I always use a lens foot like this to handhold if I have it. If I don't have it, I find the lenses quite uncomfortable. And I see some people holding lenses very flat like this in their hands. I don't like this for a couple of reasons. Firstly, you're accidentally turning dials all the time. Secondly, it's not actually a good angle for your wrist ergonomically. It can cause strain on the back of your wrist. And overall, it's just better to hold your lens sort of in the fingertips almost, or on that part of your hand. And it gives you better control over things like the zoom ring. So on this lens, I would sort of shift it a little bit and be able to turn the zoom ring. And at no point am I pressing this function button. But that is not the case on the Tamron 35 to 150. And I do not understand why people haven't noticed this. Someone surely must have used this on a Z9 and had my sized hands. My hands are fairly average as far as I understand. They are size 9 as a glove size, if that's useful to you, which I think means 9 inches from the tip of this finger to the base of that part of the hand. And I only know this because I bought some new gloves recently. They are fairly average for my height, which is not particularly tall. I'm fairly average in terms of height as well. So someone should notice this. One other YouTube reviewer should notice this, I would have thought. But I do think it's tied to the camera body. If you do not have a grip, I would imagine that you're able to hold the lens further back. But that is not the case with the Nikon Z9. There is no option to do that. You cannot fit your hand in here. You'd have to hold the lens like some sort of lunatic like this. And it's too heavy for this as well. It's just not going to work. So you have to hold it in the normal way, which is to have the grip sort of resting in the palm of your hand. This is very normal. I do this on all my lenses. And when you do that, this part of your finger presses on this bloody function button, and it's constant. And if you unweight the camera body, the lens is heavy enough that it depresses the function button. It is an unbelievable oversight in terms of camera design. There's no need to put this function button on the bottom. This one is the only one that you'd ever need. I don't even understand why there's one on top, I must admit. The thumb is useful there. I don't get it. You could have put it over here and put the lock underneath. It would have made more sense. It is just too annoying. I cannot hold this lens in a different way. That is how I hold it, and every time my hand just goes straight to that. There's no other way to hold this lens for me, and I can't live with that. Yes, I don't use these function buttons. I never find them very useful, because unless you have two separate function buttons that are configured separately, then you can't set like a preset focus distance and things like that easily. You have to use a button on the camera, but I use those for other things, so I just don't use them. It's not configured to anything. It's just really, really annoying. And that might be a fairly insane reason to send back a lens, but it's a £1,800 lens, and it's not good enough. So it's unfortunate, and it leaves me with a bit of a conundrum, because there's not really an alternative to this lens. And in fact, the Nikon Z system is frustrating in this market, because I have the 24-70 f4S. This is a good lens. It's not a brilliant lens, but it's a good lens. It's got some oddities to it, like it has to be extended before you can shoot it. Kind of annoying. It's kind of noisy. I don't love that. I don't love a lot of these Z lens designs, I must admit. It's got no focus ring. You have to use the control ring for that. It is a little bit odd, but what it is cheap, second hand. So you can buy one of these second hand, about £360, something like that. Recommended for that price. New, these are £1,000, totally not worth it. If you get it bundled as a kit lens, which is why these are so cheap second hand, very nice lens, totally acceptable, but £1,000 for that is just too much money. And this is where the Z lens lineup sort of falls apart. There's a 28-75 f2.8, which I believe to be a rebadged Tamron lens. I don't know what that one's like personally. It might be quite good, but it's not long enough really for me to warrant getting that, and I think it's still quite expensive. Where was the price? I had it up here. That's still £950 new. That is a lot of money, and you could spend a little bit more and you could get the Nikon 24-120 f4. But why doesn't it have an image stabilizer? All of its competitors, and there is no Nikon 24-105, which would be a direct competitor lenses like this. This is the Lumix 24-105 f4 with an image stabilizer. Canon have the exact same lens with an image stabilizer. They also have image stabilizers in their 24-70 f2.8, which the Nikon does not. This is a brilliant lens. I prefer this to all of my short Nikon Z lenses. And that's frustrating, because Panasonic haven't been doing this that long, and how are they coming out with nicer lens designs? This is actually roughly the same weight as the 24-70 f4, but it's longer and it's bigger and it's got an image stabilizer, and I prefer this lens to this quite significantly so, and I prefer this to the 24-120 as well. But what about the 24-70 f2.8S? Well, that's got a flaw in the focus ring design. I had two of them. I bought them both second hand because it's horrifyingly expensive new. It's £2,300 right now, I think. It's an extremely large amount of money. The two used copies I had, which I had simultaneously, both had a faulty focus ring. When you turned it too fast, it slipped, and that made it completely useless. And I do not understand how this hasn't been mentioned more online. It can't just be me. Other people must notice these faults. And yeah, maybe it's a fault that develops over time on that lens, but that's something that should be known, and it's a very expensive lens. And I think that the other manufacturers, the major sort of manufacturers like Sony and Canon, have better lenses for that same price. So it is very frustrating. And what Nikon need to do is to let Sigma start releasing lenses on their system, because the Sigma 24-70 f2.8 is half the price of the Nikon, and probably just as good. They're nice lenses and they're nicely built, but that's probably why they won't release it, or at least anytime soon. I am kind of expecting some refreshes from Nikon on some of these zoom lenses, but right now I'm a little bit stuck because I don't love that range of Nikon lenses. I love the 40f2 because it's cheap and it's made of plastic, but it's cheap and it's a good little lens. But when you're spending a not insignificant amount of money on a lens, I expect it to be brilliant. I expect it to be something that I fall in love with, like the Fujifilm 16 to 55 f2.8, which is a magic lens. It's just sharp. It's such a nice lens to use. And I've been missing that sort of feel of a brilliant and reasonably priced zoom lens since coming to the Nikon Z system. And I'd like to see that gap in the market filled. And unfortunately, it's not by the Tamron 35 to 150. But if you use this lens, if you own this lens, or if you have any of the alternatives on the Z system, please put your comments down below. I would be interested to know your thoughts on this. And thank you very much for watching. I'll see you next time.